You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, Donald Trump's first criminal trial in New York hasn't even begun in earnest yet, and already the judge is issuing a stern warning to the Trump team. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, so not surprisingly, Donald Trump's lawyers continue to try to do everything they can to delay Donald Trump's day of reckoning, which is what I call the first day of jury selection, when the criminal trial in earnest against Donald Trump commences. So they continue to want to file motions, even though the rules of procedure under the laws and the rules of New York State Court say no more motions, right? Motions are to be filed, I think, within 45 days of you being indicted. And all of that was done. All of the issues have been litigated. And the Judge Merchan, put out an order saying basically, no more motions. Done. I just resolved the last batch of motions. He said, if you want to file a motion, you have to ask for leave of the court. You have to put it all in one page, no attachments. And I can treat that one page request as your substantive motion. And what goes unspoken there is, and I will summarily deny it. And
Yeah.
here is what the judge put in his order. One of the things he put in his order to the parties, reinforcing that point. He said the rules of the New York State court system empower the court to control and limit the filing of motions, quote, to avoid the proliferation experienced under prior procedures in which defendants could bombard the courts and the judges with dilatory tactics continuing right up to the eve of trial. Judge Merchan has got Donald Trump's number and the number of his attorneys, and he is not going to let them play the kind of games that it seems like perhaps some other judges were inclined to let Donald Trump play along the way, because Donald Trump always desperately wants to delay his day of reckoning, but Judge Merchan is having none of it.
To that point, him coming out and basically saying that he has the right to manage his docket and prevent dilatory tactics right up until the eve of trial, is that him having looked at Trump's dilatory tactics in other trials and basically hardening himself ahead of this one?
Yeah, I don't think Judge Merchan is immune to the news. I'm sure he knows exactly what has been going on sort of in Trump's legal world writ large. I mean, he's being prosecuted up and down the Eastern Seaboard. He's being sued
Yeah.
successfully in several jurisdictions. And his game is clear. Donald Trump never has a defense on the merits, not in his civil cases that he has lost in spectacular fashion to E. Jean Carroll, to Attorney General Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, not in his criminal proceedings. So I think Judge Merchan has Donald Trump's number, and he reminded them not only are these the rules that I have set, but he also reminded them that if you, defense attorneys, violate those rules, there's this thing called, and I quote, this is in Judge Merchan's recent order, criminal contempt. What does that mean? It actually means a defense attorney or a prosecutor who willfully violates an order or rule of the court, even if they disagree with that rule or order, even if they believe that rule or order is illegal or contrary to the applicable rules of the jurisdiction, they can actually be jailed as punishment. They can also be fined. There are other sanctions available. Judge Merchan is not playing, and I don't think Donald Trump should really try Judge Merchan's resolve to, one, get this case to trial, and two, to handle this case in an orderly fashion so that the due administration of justice is not interrupted by Donald Trump shenanigans.
Glenn, does it feel like Donald Trump's delay tactics and obfuscation efforts in all of his other trials were strike one and strike two, even in this New York criminal trial?
I think you have to view any case in which Donald Trump is a defendant against the backdrop of all the other cases in which Donald Trump is a defendant. I mean, it would be really foolhardy to ignore Donald Trump's MO, which is that, look, I can't win on the merits, so I have to try to subvert the system in another way, usually by endlessly delaying the commencement of my trial. So, yeah, I think, as I say, Judge Merchan has Trump's number. He has the number of his lawyers. And everything Judge Merchan has said and done reinforces the fact that April 15th will be day one of Donald Trump's first criminal prosecution of 4 criminal prosecutions.
Well, barring any of these frivolous delays that may very well land Trump's lawyers on the inside of a prison cell, are there any legitimate ways that Donald Trump could seek delay here ahead of the April 15th start date for jury selection? Or is this thing starting on April 15th, rain or shine?
Okay, so let's apply some flexibility to the word legitimate for a moment, because there really don't seem like any vehicles that would sort of successfully delay the start of the trial. But some of the things Trump or his lawyers could try to do, they could file an appeal of some of Judge Merchan's recent rulings. Here's the problem. You can file an appeal. You can even file a frivolous appeal, and the appellate court can look at it and say, we're not even going to take up the substance of this appeal because, for example, a court setting a trial date is not an appealable decision or ruling or order of the court. But Donald Trump and his lawyers could try to appeal it. They could try to appeal the judge's recent rulings on, for example, motions in limine, meaning the judge ruled that certain evidence will be permitted. In really just a foolish motion, Donald Trump's lawyers said, we want you to prohibit Michael Cohen from testifying because he lied previously. He's a perjurer, which is just, to use a legal term, a stupid motion. Why? Because there's actually a standard jury instruction for how a jury should receive testimony from an admitted or convicted perjurer, because it happens all the time. Brian, do you know how many witnesses I put in the grand jury and they lied, they perjured themselves because they were, close associates of the defendant I was prosecuting, so they were trying to protect him, or they were scared to death of the defendant, so they weren't willing to testify truthfully about the defendant's crimes, and they committed perjury. Happens all the time. But then they come forward, they tell the truth for a variety of reasons, but you have somebody who committed perjury previously. There's a standard jury instruction that says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you should receive the testimony from an admitted or even a convicted perjurer with caution and scrutinize it with care. So you tell the jury, look at it a little bit more carefully than you might look at the testimony of somebody who hasn't committed perjury, but it's perfectly admissible evidence. So I use that by way of example of how Donald Trump's lawyers can and have filed frivolous motions. And the judge denied all those motions. They could try to take an appeal. But again, strictly speaking, those are not appealable issues. The appeal of all of those kind of issues have to await the conclusion of the trial. And in the event of a conviction, once you are sentenced and the trial has concluded, that's when you get to file an appeal with all of the issues you want to raise. Doesn't mean he can't file some of these appeals and hope that the appellate court might latch on to one and feel like they need to resolve it. But again, these are not legitimate ways to delay the trial. Let me just throw one other in the mix, because I've seen this happen quite a few times as a former career prosecutor. The defendant so desperately doesn't want to go to trial, but he's run out of legal rope. There are no more appeals. There are no more delays he can inject into the process. So what happens is the defendant will fire his lawyer on the eve of trial or the week before trial. Will walk into court and say, I'm unrepresented, judge. I need new counsel, and it's going to take my new counsel 6 months to gear up and prepare himself or herself to defend me at trial. That's a game that many defendants try to play. Here's the thing. You don't get to fire your counsel with complete discretion. In other words, the judge can enter into that calculation and say, I find this is a delay tactic. I am prohibiting you from firing your attorney. We're going to trial. So these are some of the things Donald Trump might try in the last several weeks in the run-up to trial. I don't think any of them will be successful, but look for all of those nefarious tactics to be employed by Donald Trump and then some.
Also, it is pretty rich of Trump's team to try to impose purity tests against liars like Michael Cohen, when they are representing Donald Trump, someone who has a physical incapability of telling the truth every time he opens his mouth. So that right there is pretty rich. Let's end with this, Glenn. What is the timeline going to look like? If this thing starts on April 15th, bring us through the timeline from beginning till end, conviction and sentencing.
Okay, so it's a fool's errand to try to predict how long a trial will take, but let me be foolish for a minute. Jury selection is likely to last 1 to 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of voir dire, loosely translated to speak the truth. You conduct voir dire, jury selection, and you try to probe each juror to make sure they can sit fairly and impartially in the case. It'll take a week or two. I suspect, so let me tell you, the way we generally approach cases is we investigate broadly, and at trial, we prove the case narrowly. We don't want to overstay our welcome. We want to put our best evidentiary foot forward, give the jury just what we think they need, but not inundate them with too much evidence or too much detail. It's always a difficult balance to strike and comes with lots of challenging tactical decisions, which frankly makes criminal trial work so much fun. But the prosecution's case will probably take a couple of weeks to prove, and then we move to the defense case. Here's the thing. Defendants do not have a burden of proof. Defendants do not need to call a single witness or move a single item into evidence. They can, but they need not. So sometimes the defense case is non-existent. Sometimes it can go on for weeks. But if I had to sort of project as best we could tell based on all of the evidence that at least has been publicly reported, I have a feeling we should see this case go to the jury to begin deliberations within about 5 or 6 weeks of that April 15th start date. And then a jury can deliberate for 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month. I've had all of those periods of deliberation. The 1 month was in a very lengthy RICO trial. But how long it's going to take a jury to resolve a case once it's given to them to start deliberating is anybody's guess.
So that brings us to about June or July. And then, of course, if they return a guilty verdict, then we'll see sentencing between 30 and 90 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, each jurisdiction sets its own timetable for how long between a jury verdict, a conviction, a guilty verdict, and the date they go to sentencing. There is what's called a pre-sentence report generated. So there's lots of information that's gathered up about the defendant, about the crimes, about any victims, how it's impacted them, the impact on the community. All of that is packaged into, what can often be a lengthy 25, 30, 40-page pre-sentence report. That pre-sentence report is given to the judge. And so the judge has as much information about the offenses of conviction and about the offender before the judge has to decide what the sentence should be. So that could take another month or two after the jury presumably returns guilty verdicts. So look, we could see Donald Trump being a convicted felon sometime late summer, early fall.
Okay, well, we'll obviously stay on top of this trial as it continues to play itself out. For those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.